The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped inside. The sound was almost swallowed by the vastness of the showroom. A space so polished and pristine that it felt more like a museum than a store. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light across rows of gleaming pianos. Black lacquer reflected the glow like still water. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and something else, something expensive that he couldn't quite name. He stood near the entrance for a moment, just taking it all in. His heart was beating a little faster than usual, though he tried not to show it. This was the place. After 3 years of saving every spare dollar, after countless nights of overtime and weekends spent picking up extra work, he had finally made it here, to the finest piano showroom in the city. But as he looked down at himself, a familiar feeling crept into his chest. He had come straight from work. There hadn't been time to go home and change. His jeans were faded and worn at the knees. His boots were scuffed and dusty from the shop floor. His flannel shirt had a small tear near the collar that he kept meaning to fix but never got around to. And his hands, well, no amount of scrubbing could completely remove the traces of grease that had worked their way into the lines of his palms and under his fingernails. He didn't belong here. At least, that's what the room seemed to whisper to him, but he pushed that thought aside. He had worked too hard for this moment. He had earned the right to be here, even if nobody else knew it yet. A young sales associate noticed him almost immediately. The man was tall and thin, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than a month's rent. His hair was slicked back, and he wore the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The associate glanced at the newcomer's clothes, then at his boots, then at his hands. The smile flickered, just for a second, before settling into something colder. The associate nudged a female colleague standing nearby and whispered something. She covered her mouth to hide a small laugh, then quickly looked away. He pretended not to notice. He had learned long ago that noticing only made it worse. Instead, he walked deeper into the showroom, letting his eyes wander across the instruments. There were uprights along one wall, their polished surfaces reflecting the light, but it was the grand pianos in the center of the room that drew his attention. They sat on raised platforms like sculptures, each one more beautiful than the last. And then he saw it. In the very center of the showroom, positioned beneath the largest chandelier, sat a concert grand piano. It was massive, nearly 9 feet long, with a body of deep, lustrous black. The lid was propped open, revealing the intricate network of strings and hammers inside. Even from a distance, he could tell this was something special. This wasn't just an instrument. This was a work of art. He walked toward it slowly, almost reverently. His reflection appeared in the polished surface as he approached, and for a moment he saw himself as others might see him, a tired-looking man in worn clothes, out of place among all this elegance. But beneath that reflection, he saw something else too. He saw the boy who had first touched piano keys at the age of 6, picking out melodies on his grandmother's old upright while she watched from her wheelchair with tears in her eyes. He saw the teenager who had practiced for hours in empty churches and school auditoriums, anywhere he could find a decent piano. He saw the young man who had worked 2 jobs to pay for lessons, who had sacrificed everything for the music that lived inside him. That man had every right to be here. He stopped in front of the concert grand and simply stood there, admiring it. The price tag was visible on a small stand nearby. $175,000. He had known it would be expensive, but seeing the number still made his breath catch. That was more money than his mother had earned in her entire life. More than his grandmother had ever seen in one place. But he had saved, he had planned, and he was ready. The sales associate appeared beside him so quickly it was almost startling. Up close, the man's cologne was overpowering. A sharp, citrus scent that seemed designed to announce his presence before he even spoke. "Can I help you find something?" the associate asked. His tone was polite on the surface, but there was something underneath it. Something dismissive. "The bus stop is just around the corner, if that's what you're looking for." He felt the words land like small stones against his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. He had heard worse, much worse. "I'm here to look at pianos," he said calmly. "This one, actually." The associate let out a short laugh, then quickly tried to disguise it as a cough. "Sir, this is our flagship instrument. A concert grand. It's priced at $175,000. He said the number slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "Perhaps you didn't see the tag." "I saw it." "I see." The associate's smile tightened. "Well, we have a store policy. For instruments in this price range, we require customers to demonstrate financial qualification before we allow them to test the piano. I'm sure you understand. We can't have just anyone putting their hands on an instrument like this. Just anyone." The words hung in the air between them. He understood perfectly. He understood that the policy was being invented on the spot. He understood that the couple on the other side of the showroom, dressed in designer clothes and dripping with jewelry, had been offered glasses of champagne the moment they walked in. They were currently sitting at a $90,000 piano, banging out a clumsy version of Heart and Soul while laughing loudly at their own mistakes. Nobody had asked them to demonstrate anything. He understood that the teenage girl near the window, who was paying more attention to her phone than to any of the instruments, had been told to take her time and explore whatever catches her eye. Her designer handbag alone probably cost more than everything he was wearing combined, and he understood that if he had walked in here wearing a suit and a fancy watch, everything would be different. The same associate would be offering him champagne and calling him "sir" in a way that actually meant something. But he was wearing work boots and a torn flannel shirt, so he was a problem to be managed. An embarrassment to be shuffled out the door before he made the real customers uncomfortable. The store manager appeared a moment later. She was a woman in her 50s, with sharp features and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in front of a mirror. Her eyes performed the same quick assessment the associates had. Clothes, boots, hands. Her smile grew even tighter. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "No problem at all," the associate said smoothly. "I was just explaining our policies to this gentleman. I think he might be more comfortable in our digital piano section. It's in the back." The manager nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Yes, that might be more appropriate. The digital instruments are quite nice, and much more affordable. I'm sure you'll find something that suits your needs back there." She gestured toward the rear of the store, where a small section of electronic keyboards sat in shadow, far from the gleaming grands in the center of the room. It was clear she expected him to accept the suggestion gratefully and disappear. He looked at the manager, then at the associate, then at the concert grand piano that had brought him here in the first place. 3 years of saving, 3 years of dreaming. And here he was, being directed to the back of the store like he didn't belong among beautiful things. Something shifted inside him. Not anger. Exactly. He had learned long ago that anger only gave people power over you. No. This was something quieter. Something more determined. It was the same feeling that had carried him through every obstacle in his life, every closed door, every dismissive look, every person who had told him, in words or in silence, that he would never amount to anything. He took a slow breath and made a decision. He wasn't going anywhere. He didn't move toward the back of the store. He didn't shuffle away with his head down like they expected. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was, standing in front of that beautiful concert grand piano, feeling its pull like a magnet drawing him closer. The manager's smile wavered just slightly. She wasn't used to this. People like him, people who looked like they didn't have 2 coins to rub together, they usually took the hint. They got embarrassed and left quietly. That's how it was supposed to work. That's how it always worked. But not today. "I'd like to see this piano," he said. His voice was steady, neither aggressive nor apologetic. Just clear. "This is the one I came for." The sales associate exchanged a quick glance with the manager. There was something in that look, a mixture of amusement and annoyance, like they were dealing with a child who didn't understand the rules of a grown-up world. "Sir," the associate said, stretching the word out with exaggerated patience. As I explained, this instrument requires a qualification process. We can't simply allow anyone to. What does that process involve? He interrupted calmly. What do I need to do? The associate blinked, caught off guard. Clearly, he hadn't expected the question. He had expected surrender. Well, it's a financial verification, the associate stammered. We need to see proof that a customer has the means to actually purchase an instrument at this level. A bank statement, perhaps. Or a letter from a financial advisor, something that demonstrates serious intent. I see. He nodded slowly, as if considering this. And did you ask that couple over there for a bank statement? He gestured toward the wealthy-looking pair who were still giggling over their terrible piano playing on the other side of the showroom. The woman was now attempting some kind of dramatic pose at the keys, while her husband took photos with his phone. The associate's face flushed pink. That's a different situation. How so? They're clearly. Clearly what? The associate's mouth opened and closed. He looked to the manager for help, but she seemed just as uncomfortable. The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. The truth was obvious to everyone standing there. The couple hadn't been asked for proof of anything. They had walked in looking wealthy, and that was enough. They had been welcomed with open arms, offered refreshments, and given free rein to touch any instrument they wanted. Nobody had questioned whether they could actually afford anything. Nobody had suggested they might be more comfortable in the budget section, because they looked the part, and he didn't. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office, the manager said smoothly, trying to regain control of the situation. I'm sure we can sort this out privately, without disturbing our other guests. Other guests. Not customers, guests. As if this were some exclusive party and he was the uninvited stranger who had wandered in off the street. He shook his head. I don't need to go to your office. I just need 5 minutes with this piano. Sir, I really must insist. 5 minutes, he repeated. That's all I'm asking. Let me play for 5 minutes. If you still want me to leave after that, I'll walk out the door, and you'll never see me again. The manager hesitated. He could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. On one hand, she wanted him gone. He was making things awkward, drawing attention from the staff and a few curious customers who had started to notice the exchange. On the other hand, causing a scene would be worse. If she called security or forced him out physically, it could get ugly. People might complain. Someone might even record it on their phone. 5 minutes. Just let the man embarrass himself for 5 minutes, and then he would leave on his own. Problem solved. Fine, she said at last, her tone clipped. 5 minutes. But then I really must ask you to move along. The associate looked like he wanted to protest, but the manager silenced him with a look. She stepped back, folding her arms across her chest. Clearly expecting this to be quick and painless, he moved toward the piano bench, his worn boots silent on the polished floor. As he sat down, he noticed a few things. The bench was perfectly positioned. The piano's surface gleamed without a single fingerprint. The keys were pristine, their ivory and ebony surfaces waiting like an empty canvas. He placed his hands on the keys, and for a moment, he just let them rest there. He could feel the cool smoothness beneath his calloused fingers. These hands had changed oil and replaced brake pads just hours ago. They had turned wrenches and tightened bolts. They were working hands, rough and stained. But they were also the same hands that had spent thousands of hours on keyboards just like this one, the same hands that had once made audiences weep with the beauty of the music they could create. He closed his eyes and took a breath. Behind him, he could sense the impatience in the room. The associate was probably checking his watch already. The manager was probably rehearsing the polite but firm words she would use to escort him out. The other customers had gone back to their browsing, assuming this would be nothing worth watching. None of them knew what was about to happen. He thought about his grandmother in that moment. She had been the first person to ever believe in him. When he was just a small boy, she had noticed something different about him. The way he listened to music, really listened, with his whole body. The way he could hum back melodies after hearing them only once. the way his fingers seemed to itch whenever they were near a keyboard. She had saved for months to buy that old upright piano from a church that was closing down. It was battered and out of tune, with keys that stuck and pedals that squeaked, but to him, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. "You have a gift," she used to tell him, her voice soft and certain. "Don't let anyone tell you different. Don't let anyone take it from you." She had passed away when he was 17. He had played at her funeral, barely able to see the keys through his tears. But he had played, because that's what she would have wanted. That's what she had taught him to do. When life got hard, when people were cruel, when the world tried to push him down, he played. And that's what he was going to do now. He thought about his mother, too. She had worked 2 jobs her whole life, cleaning houses during the day and stocking shelves at night. Her hands had been rough like his, worn down by years of labor, but she had always made sure he had time for his music. She had driven him to lessons in their old car that broke down every other week. She had sat in the back of recital halls, still wearing her work uniform because she had come straight from her shift, clapping louder than anyone else. She had gotten sick when he was 22. Cancer. The aggressive kind that moved fast and showed no mercy. He had sat by her hospital bed and played recordings of his performances on an old phone, the speaker crackling with each note. She had smiled even through the pain. "Keep playing," she had whispered near the end. "Promise me you'll keep playing." He had promised. And he had kept that promise. Even when life made it nearly impossible. Even when he had to take a job at the auto shop because it was the only work he could find. Even when his dreams felt further away than the stars. He had kept playing. In his small apartment late at night, on the electronic keyboard he had bought second-hand, in empty churches that let him practice when no one else was around. Wherever he could find a piano and a few quiet minutes, he played. And now, sitting at this magnificent concert grand in this gleaming showroom, surrounded by people who had already decided he was nothing, he was ready to play again. His fingers found their positions on the keys. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade. No. 1-inch G minor formed in his mind. Every phrase memorized so deeply it was like breathing. This was one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire. It took years to master. Decades to truly understand. It required not just technical skill but emotional depth. The ability to tell a story without words. He had been playing this piece for 20 years. He pressed the first key, and a single note rang out into the showroom, pure and clear as a bell. And then everything changed. The first note floated through the showroom like a whisper. Soft, gentle, almost hesitant. The way the piece was meant to begin. It was a question. That first note. A wondering, a longing for something just out of reach. Then came the second note. And the third. And slowly, like a flower opening its petals to the morning sun, the melody began to unfold. The sales associate had been checking his watch, counting down the seconds, until he could usher this unwelcome visitor out the door. But somewhere around the 5th measure, his hand froze in midair. His eyes lifted from the watch face to the man at the piano. Something was wrong. Or rather, something was very, very right. This wasn't what he had expected. He had expected clumsy fumbling. He had expected a few basic chords, maybe a stumbling attempt at some simple tune. He had expected exactly what you would expect from a man in work boots and a torn flannel shirt who had wandered into a place where he clearly didn't belong. But this was something else entirely. The manager had turned away, already composing an email in her head, planning her afternoon, mentally moving past this minor inconvenience. But the music caught her mid-thought. Like a hand reaching out and touching her shoulder, she turned back slowly, her perfectly composed expression cracking just slightly. Across the showroom, the wealthy couple had stopped their laughing and posing. The woman's hand was still resting on the keys of the piano she had been playing, but her fingers had gone still. Her husband had lowered his phone. They were both staring at the man in the center of the room, as if seeing him for the first time. The teenage girl near the window looked up from her screen. For a moment, her face held that blank, bored expression that teenagers wear like armor. But then something shifted. Her thumb stopped scrolling. Her eyes widened just a little. She slipped her phone into her pocket without even realizing she had done it. And still, the music grew. The Chopin Ballade is not a piece for beginners. It is not a piece for amateurs or hobbyists, or people who play piano, a little bit, at parties. It is one of the most demanding works in the entire classical piano repertoire. It requires fingers that can move like lightning across the keys, hands that can stretch and reach and dance with precision, measured in fractions of seconds. It requires years of dedicated practice. The kind of practice that leaves your hands aching and your mind exhausted. But more than technique, it requires soul. It requires the player to feel every note, to understand the story being told, to pour themselves into the music until there is no separation between the player and the piano, until they become one voice, speaking directly to the hearts of everyone who listens. The man at the piano had all of this. And something more. His calloused fingers, the same fingers that had been covered in motor oil just hours before, moved across the keys with impossible grace. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Each note fell exactly where it was supposed to fall. Each phrase breathed exactly as it was meant to breathe. But it wasn't mechanical. It wasn't just technically perfect. It was alive. The music swelled and retreated like ocean waves. It whispered secrets and shouted triumphs. It wept with sorrow and laughed with joy. It told a story that had no words but somehow said everything that words could never capture. One of the other sales associates, a young woman who had been arranging brochures near the entrance, stopped what she was doing and walked slowly toward the sound. Her mouth was slightly open. She had studied piano for 8 years as a child. She knew enough to recognize what she was hearing. This wasn't just good. This was extraordinary. A customer who had been examining an upright piano in the corner stood frozen with his hand on the lid. He had come in looking for a simple instrument for his daughter to practice on. He had never expected to witness something like this. An older gentleman who worked in the back office, handling paperwork and inventory, emerged from behind a door marked "Staff Only." He had heard music from the showroom countless times before. Customers were always testing the pianos, plunking out simple melodies, or showing off half-remembered songs from their childhood. But this sound had pulled him from his desk like a siren call. He stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, his reading glasses still perched on his nose. The music built to its first great climax, a cascade of notes tumbling over each other like a waterfall. Powerful and relentless, the man's hands flew across the keyboard, his body swaying slightly with the force of the music. His eyes were closed now, his face transformed by an expression that was almost painful in its intensity. This was not performance, this was truth. And then, just as suddenly, the music softened again. It became tender, delicate, like a lullaby sung to a sleeping child. The contrast was breathtaking. One moment, thunder. The next, the gentlest rain. The sales associate who had been so dismissive, so certain that this man was wasting everyone's time, found himself unable to look away. His throat felt tight. There was a strange burning sensation behind his eyes that he didn't quite understand. He couldn't remember the last time music had made him feel anything at all. The manager had unfolded her arms. They hung at her sides now, forgotten. Her practiced smile had disappeared entirely, replaced by something real, something vulnerable. She looked like a person seeing color for the first time after a lifetime of black and white. Minutes passed, though no one was counting anymore. The 5-minute limit had been forgotten. It didn't matter now. Nothing mattered except the music filling the room, filling the air, filling something deep inside every person present that they hadn't even known was empty. The piece moved through its middle sections, each one a new chapter in the story. There were moments of playful lightness, like sunlight dancing on water. There were passages of deep melancholy, heavy with the weight of loss and longing. There were bursts of fierce determination, notes struck with the force of a fighter refusing to surrender. And through it all, the man played on. His rough hands drew sounds from that piano that seemed impossible, sounds that the instrument itself seemed surprised to be making, as if it had been waiting its whole existence for someone who could truly bring it to life. The wealthy woman at the other piano had tears streaming down her face. She didn't know why she was crying. She couldn't have explained it if someone had asked, but the tears came anyway, rolling down her cheeks and dripping onto her expensive silk blouse. Her husband reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. His own eyes were glistening. The teenage girl had moved closer without realizing it. She stood near a pillar now, watching the man's hands with an expression of wonder. She had never cared about classical music before. It had always seemed boring, old-fashioned, something for her grandparents' generation. But this was different. This was speaking to her in a language she hadn't known she understood. The older gentleman from the back office removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He had worked in this showroom for 15 years. He had heard hundreds of pianists come and go. He had never heard anything like this. As the piece approached its final section, the music grew in intensity once more. It was building towards something, gathering power like a storm on the horizon. The notes came faster, stronger, more urgent. There was a desperation in them now, a cry from the heart that refused to be silenced. And then the finale arrived. A thunderous passage that required every ounce of skill, every bit of strength, every drop of passion the player could summon. The man's hands were a blur, moving so fast they seemed to multiply. The piano sang and roared and screamed and whispered all at once, filling the showroom with a wall of sound that was somehow both overwhelming and beautiful. The last notes rang out, powerful and defiant. And then, with one final chord that seemed to shake the very air itself, the music stopped. Silence fell over the showroom. Complete, absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. The man sat at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys, his head slightly bowed. His chest rose and fell with deep breaths. He looked exhausted, emptied, like someone who had just run a marathon of the soul. And then, from somewhere in the room, someone began to clap. It was the teenage girl who started clapping first. Her hands came together almost instinctively. Before her brain had fully caught up with what was happening, the sound echoed through the silent showroom, sharp and sudden like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Then someone else joined in. The older gentleman from the back office, still standing in the doorway with his glasses in his hand. His applause was slower, more deliberate. The kind of clapping that comes from deep appreciation, rather than polite obligation. Then the wealthy woman, still wiping tears from her cheeks, began to clap as well. Her husband joined her a second later. Then, the young sales associate near the brochures. Then the customer who had been looking at upright pianos. One by one, every person in the showroom began to applaud. The sound grew and swelled until it filled the entire space. It bounced off the polished floors and the crystal chandeliers. It wrapped around the rows of gleaming pianos like a warm embrace. It was the sound of people who had just witnessed something extraordinary and didn't quite know how else to respond. The man at the piano lifted his head slowly. He seemed almost surprised by the applause, as if he had forgotten there was anyone else in the room. For those few minutes while he played, he had been somewhere else entirely. Somewhere, deep inside himself. In a place where the music lived and breathed, and nothing else mattered. He blinked a few times, coming back to reality. His eyes scanned the faces around him. The wealthy couple, still applauding with genuine enthusiasm. The teenage girl, her earlier boredom completely forgotten, looking at him with something close to amazement. The various staff members, their professional masks stripped away, showing the real human beings underneath. And then his gaze landed on the sales associate who had tried to turn him away. The young man in the expensive suit had stopped clapping. His hands hung at his sides, and his face had gone pale. He looked like someone who had just realized he had made a terrible mistake. The manager stood a few feet away, and her expression was even more complicated. There was shock there, certainly, and embarrassment. But there was something else too. Something that might have been the beginning of shame. Her arms were no longer folded in that defensive, dismissive posture. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by what she had just witnessed. The applause gradually faded, leaving behind a charged silence. No one seemed to know what to say. The rules of the situation had completely changed, and everyone was still trying to figure out where they stood. It was the wealthy woman who spoke first. She stepped forward, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than most people's shoes. "That was," she started, then stopped, searching for the right word. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. In my entire life. I mean it. I've been to concerts at symphony halls all over the world, and I've never felt anything like that." Her husband nodded vigorously. "Absolutely incredible. Just wow." He shook his head in disbelief. "Where did you study? Who was your teacher?" The man rose slowly from the piano bench. His movements were calm, unhurried. He looked down at his hands for a moment. Those rough, calloused hands that still bore the marks of his morning work at the auto shop. Then he looked back up at the faces watching him. "I had many teachers over the years," he said quietly, "but my first teacher was my grandmother. She couldn't afford lessons, so she taught me herself. She only knew a few songs, simple things she had learned as a girl, but she showed me where to put my fingers. She taught me how to listen, and she made me believe that I could do something with this gift." He paused, and something passed across his face. A shadow of old grief, old love, memories that never quite stopped hurting. "I went to school for music," he continued. "Studied for years. Performed in places I never dreamed I'd see. Concert halls with audiences in the thousands. Competitions with the best pianists in the world." He allowed himself a small, quiet smile. "I even won a few of them." The sales associate made a small choking sound. The manager's face went from pale to white. "But life has a way of changing your plans," the man said. "My mother got sick, really sick. The kind of sick that takes everything you have just to keep fighting. I moved back home to take care of her. Sold my apartment in the city, used up my savings on medical bills. When she passed, I had nothing left. No savings. No career. No connections in the music world anymore." He shrugged, as if describing someone else's misfortune rather than his own. "So I got a job. The only job I could find. Fixing cars. Changing oil. Replacing transmissions." He held up his hands, showing the grease stains and calluses. "It's honest work. Hard work. Nothing to be ashamed of. It pays the rent. Keeps food on the table." The showroom was completely silent. Everyone was hanging on his every word. "But I never stopped playing," he said, and now there was a fire in his voice that hadn't been there before. "Not once. Not for a single day. I have a keyboard in my apartment. A cheap one I bought secondhand. I play it every night after work. I play until my neighbors bang on the walls and tell me to stop. And even then, sometimes, I just turn the volume down and keep going." He turned slightly and looked at the concert grand piano behind him. His eyes moved across its surface with a tenderness that was almost painful to witness. "I've been saving for 3 years to buy a piano," he said. "A real piano. Not a keyboard. Not a digital imitation. The real thing. The kind of instrument I used to play when my life was different. The kind that responds to every touch, every breath, every feeling you put into it." He turned back to face the manager and the sales associate. His expression was calm, without anger, without bitterness. Just the steady gaze of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. "I came here today because this store has the finest pianos in the city. I walked in ready to spend money I've been saving for 3 years. Real money. The kind you put in a bank and watch grow, dollar by dollar, month by month." The manager opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "But before I could even look at an instrument," he continued, "before I could ask a question or have a conversation, you both decided you knew everything about me. You looked at my clothes, you looked at my boots, you looked at the dirt under my fingernails, and you decided I wasn't worth your time." The sales associate's face had gone from pale to red. He stared at the floor, unable to meet the man's eyes. "You didn't ask my name. You didn't ask why I was here. You didn't ask if I played, or how long, or what kind of music I loved. None of that mattered to you. The only thing that mattered was that I didn't look like your other customers. I didn't look like money. So you tried to send me to the back of the store, where I wouldn't bother anyone important." The wealthy woman's husband cleared his throat uncomfortably. His wife was looking at the manager with an expression that had shifted from tearful appreciation to something much colder. "I want you to understand something," the man said, his voice still calm but carrying a weight that filled the room. "I'm not angry. I've dealt with this my whole life. When you grow up poor, when you don't have the right clothes, or the right address, or the right family name, people make assumptions. They look at the outside and think they know what's inside. They see the package and think they know what's in the box." He shook his head slowly. "But you never know who's standing in front of you. You never know what someone has been through, what they've accomplished, what they carry inside them. The most talented person you'll ever meet might be wearing torn jeans and work boots. The kindest soul in the world might be driving a rusted-out car. The next great artist, the next great musician, the next person who changes the world, they might walk into your store looking exactly like me." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And if you judge them by their clothes instead of their character, you'll never even know what you missed." The showroom remained frozen in that heavy silence. Nobody moved. Nobody seemed to know what to do next. The man's words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away, impossible to ignore. The manager was the first to try to speak. She took a step forward, her hands clasped together in front of her like she was about to pray. Her earlier confidence had completely vanished. In its place was something that looked almost like fear. "Sir, we." She stumbled over the words, her polished professional voice cracking at the edges. "I don't know what to say. I am so deeply sorry. If we had known who you were, we never would have." "That's the problem," he interrupted gently. "You shouldn't need to know who I am. You shouldn't treat someone with respect only after you find out they're successful or talented or famous. Every person who walks through that door deserves basic dignity, whether they're here to buy a $100,000 piano or just to look around and dream." The manager's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. 15 years in this business, climbing the ladder, learning all the right ways to spot a serious buyer from a time waster. She had built her whole career on making quick judgments about people. And now, standing in front of this man in his worn flannel shirt, she realized how much those judgments had cost her. Not just today, but probably countless times before, with countless people she had dismissed without ever knowing what she had lost. The sales associate stepped forward. His earlier arrogance had completely disappeared. He looked young now, much younger than he had seemed before. Young and scared and deeply ashamed. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "I'm really, truly sorry. What I said to you, the way I treated you, there's no excuse. I was wrong, completely wrong." The man looked at him for a long moment. There was no hatred in his eyes, no desire for revenge, just a quiet sadness that seemed somehow worse than anger would have been. "I forgive you," he said simply. "But I want you to remember this feeling. Remember how it feels right now. This shame and regret, and the next time someone walks through that door who doesn't look like they belong, I want you to think twice. I want you to see them as a person first. Not a set of clothes. Not a bank account. A person." The young man nodded rapidly, blinking back tears. "I will. I promise I will." The man reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt. Several people in the room tensed slightly, unsure what to expect. But what he pulled out was just a piece of paper. Folded neatly into a rectangle, he unfolded it slowly, revealing a certified check. The amount was clearly visible to those standing nearby. The wealthy woman gasped softly. The manager's eyes went wide. It was more than enough to buy the concert grand. More than enough to buy two of them, in fact. I came here today ready to buy my dream piano, he said, looking down at the check in his hands. 3 years of saving. 3 years of overtime shifts and skipped dinners and saying no to everything except the absolute necessities. 3 years of keeping this dream alive in my heart, even when it felt impossible. He walked slowly toward the concert grand, the check still in his hand. He ran his fingers along the polished surface one more time, feeling the smooth wood beneath his touch. The piano really was magnificent, everything he had ever wanted. Then he turned back to face the room. But I won't be buying it here. The manager made a small sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. The sales associate closed his eyes. Not because I want revenge, he continued. Not because I want to punish you, but because trust matters to me. Respect matters to me, and I can't give my business to a place that only showed me respect after I proved I deserved it. He folded the check and put it back in his pocket. I'll find another store, another piano, and I'll give my money to people who treat everyone with kindness. Not just the ones who look the part. The wealthy woman stepped forward again. Her earlier tears had dried, but her eyes were still red and puffy. She looked at the man with an expression of deep respect. I want you to know, she said, that what happened here today, it changed me. I've never really thought about these things before. I've always been on the other side of it. You know? The side that gets the champagne and the smiles and the open doors. I never stopped to think about what it's like for people on the other side. She reached out and took his hand in both of hers. Her jewelry glittered in the chandelier light, diamonds and gold against his rough, stained skin. Thank you, she said, for the music and for the lesson. I won't forget either one. Her husband nodded in agreement. If you ever need anything, he said. A venue for a concert, connections in the music world, anything at all, please reach out. The world deserves to hear you play. The man smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes for the first time since he had walked into the store. Thank you. That means more than you know. Quote, the teenage girl had worked up the courage to approach. She stood a few feet away, shifting her weight from foot to foot, looking nervous. Excuse me, she said, her voice small. I just wanted to say, I've never really cared about classical music before, like, my parents are always trying to get me to practice piano, and I always thought it was boring and pointless. She paused, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. But what you just played, it made me feel things I didn't know music could make you feel. It was like you were telling a story, but without any words. Does that make sense? The man nodded warmly. It makes perfect sense. That's exactly what music is supposed to do. I think I want to practice more, she said quietly. Like, really practice. Not just go through the motions to make my parents happy. I want to be able to make people feel things like that someday. The man reached out and put a hand on her shoulder. Then do it. Practice every day. Not because anyone tells you to, but because you love it. Because the music lives inside you and needs to come out. That's the only way to become truly great at anything. She nodded, her eyes bright with something that looked like the beginning of a dream. The man turned to leave. He had taken only a few steps toward the door when the older gentleman from the back office called out, Wait, please. The man stopped and turned back. The older gentleman walked forward slowly. He had been quiet this whole time, watching everything unfold without saying a word. But now there was something in his eyes, a determination that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. I've worked here for 15 years, he said. I've seen a lot of things, good things, bad things. I've watched people get treated differently based on how they look, how they dress, what kind of car they drive. I always told myself it wasn't my place to say anything. I was just the guy who handled the paperwork. He stopped a few feet from the man in the flannel shirt. But you're right. What happened today was wrong. And I'm tired of being quiet about things that are wrong. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a business card. My nephew owns a piano store across town. Smaller than this place, not as fancy, but he treats everyone who walks through the door like they matter. Because they do. He pressed the card into the man's hand. Tell him I sent you. He'll take good care of you. The man looked down at the card, then back up at the older gentleman. A moment of understanding passed between them. Two people who knew what it meant to be overlooked, to be underestimated, to be judged by surfaces rather than substance. Thank you, the man said. I'll do that. He walked to the door, his worn boots silent on the polished floor. Before he pushed it open, he turned back one last time and looked at the room full of people who would never see the world quite the same way again. Remember, he said quietly, every person you meet is carrying something you can't see. Talent you can't imagine. Pain you can't understand. Dreams you can't measure. The clothes don't make the person. The music does. The kindness does. The heart does. And with that, he stepped out into the afternoon sun, leaving behind a showroom full of beautiful pianos and changed lives. The bell above the door chimed softly as it closed behind him. It was the same sound that had greeted his arrival. But somehow, everything was different now. Everything.